Hello, in this lesson, we are looking at real number system. Now, what is a real number? A real number is simply any number which can be represented on a number line. So, if you think of any number at all which can be represented on a number line, that is a real number. So, let's consider this number line. Now, on the number line, we have 0 at the center, and there are two sides to the number line. Those on the right hand side are positive numbers, and those on the left hand side are negative numbers. So if you think of any number at all, right, which can be represented on the number line, we call that number a real number. Now, if you think of a number like 3.5, 3.5 can be represented on number line, which is found between 3 and 4. What about 1.2? It can be found on the number line, which is between 1 and 2. What about 0.5? It can be found between 0 and 1. What about 1,000? We can represent 1,000 on the number line. That is, if we are to extend this line, we can get 1,000. What about negative 5.2? If we are to extend the number line once again, we can get negative 5.2. So any number at all which can be represented on the number line is what we call a real number. Now, if you take a look at the numbers I represented on the number line, which are real numbers, they can be grouped into different forms. You can have some of the real numbers being what we call natural numbers. So what are natural numbers? Natural numbers are simply numbers that are used for counting. Natural numbers are numbers that are used for counting. And because they are numbers used for counting, another name for them is counting numbers. So another name for natural numbers is counting numbers. And you agree with me that if we are counting items, we start from 1, we move to 2. So examples of natural numbers or counting numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So 6, 7, and so on. So these are natural numbers. Then you can also group some of the real numbers into what we call whole numbers. So what are whole numbers? Whole numbers are simply natural numbers in addition to 0. So when we add 0 to natural numbers or counting numbers, we get whole numbers. Alright, so whole numbers starts from 0. Then we continue from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So based on this, we can say that natural numbers can be found in whole numbers. And because natural numbers can be found in whole numbers, we see that natural numbers are subsets of whole numbers. So whole numbers is the same as natural numbers, just that we are adding 0. Then we can also group some of the real numbers into what we call even numbers. Now, what are even numbers? Even numbers are numbers that can be divided by 2 without any remainder. They are numbers that can be divided by 2 without any remainder. Alright, what it means is that if we divide that number by 2, we shouldn't get any remainder. There shouldn't be anything left. So an example is 2. because 2 divided by 2 gives us 1 and there is no remainder. 4 is also an even number. And the reason is because 4 divided by 2 gives us 2 and there is no remainder. 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. You have 2 people sharing 6 items. Each person will get 3 and there will be no remainder. What about 8, 10, 12? And the list continues. Then we can also have some of the real numbers being what we call odd numbers. Being odd numbers. So what are odd numbers? Odd numbers are simply numbers that can be divided by 2 and there will be a remainder. So any number that can be divided by 2 and there will be a remainder is an odd number. So an example is 3. Because if you divide 3 by 2, you get 1, remainder 1. So you have 2 people sharing 3 items. Each person will get 1 and there will be a remainder of 1. What about 5? 5 is an odd number because 5 divided by 2 gives us 2, remainder 1. If 2 people are sharing 5 items, each person will get 2 items, remainder 1 item. So another example is 7. Another example is 9. Another example is 11, 13. So can you brainstorm other examples? Numbers that when you divide by 2, you get remainder. Then you can also group some of the real numbers into what you call prime numbers. So what are prime numbers? Prime numbers are simply numbers that are greater than 1 and cannot be divided by any other number apart from themselves and 1. So I take it again. Prime numbers are numbers which are greater than 1 and cannot be divided by any other number apart from themselves and 1. So what it means is that these numbers which are called prime numbers, they can be divided by only themselves and the number 1. Alright? And they are also greater than 1. So what it means is that 1 cannot be a prime number. 1 cannot be a prime number. Alright? So 1 is not a prime number. So we can think of 2. Because 2 divided by itself, 2 can only be divided by itself and the number 1. Because 2 divided by 2 gives us 1. 2 divided by 1 gives us 2. You can't divide 2 by 3. You can't divide 2 by 5. You can't divide 2 by 7. The only numbers that can divide 2 and leaves no remainder is 2 and it's 2 and 1. It's itself and 1. So we can also think of 3. We can think of 3 because 3 cannot be divided by 2. Alright? 3 can be divided by itself and 1. Remember, the division here is such that there will be no remainder. The division here is such that there will be no remainder. So 3 cannot be divided by 2 because we will get a remainder. So the only numbers that can divide 3 and there will be no remainder are 3 itself and 1. What about 5? 5 is a prime number. We can also talk of 7 as a prime number. We can talk of 11, a prime number. We can talk of 13, a prime number. and so on. Now, let me ask this question. Why is 9 not a prime number? 9 is not a prime number because it can be divided by another number like 3. Remember, the condition for a number to be a prime number is that it should be divided by itself and 1. Alright? When we divide 9 by itself, we'll get 1. When we divide 9 by 1, we'll get 9. But these are not the only two numbers that can divide 9. 3 can also divide 9. So because 3 can divide 9, 9 is not considered as a prime number. The same thing applies to 12, 15. All these are not prime numbers. Now, some of the real numbers can also be grouped into, but before I look into that, let me be quick to add that 1 is also an example of odd numbers, since when we divide 1 by 2, there will be a remainder. Alright. So, some of the real numbers can also be grouped into what we call integers. Now, what are integers? Integers are simply positive and negative whole numbers. Integers are simply positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. Positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. So, examples of integers are just the same as whole numbers, but there will be negative and positive. So, 1 is an integer. Negative 1 is an integer, right? Positive 2, an integer. Negative 2, integer. 0 is an integer, right? Negative 5 is also an integer. So integers are simply positive and negative whole numbers. So by this, what it means is that a fraction or a decimal is not an integer, because for integers, we are only talking about what? Whole numbers. So if I give you 2 on 5, it's not an integer, because 2 on 5 will not give me a whole number. All right. Anything that gives a whole number is what we call an integer. All right. It's an integer. So fractions, certain fractions cannot be integers. All right, because they will not result in giving us whole numbers. All right. Then there are some of the real numbers, or let me say that all these real numbers that I have classified into, they are classified broadly into what we call rational numbers. Into what we call rational numbers. Now, what are rational numbers? Rational numbers are simply numbers that can be represented as a ratio of one integer to another integer. In other words, rational numbers are numbers that can be represented in the form A over B. All right, where A is an integer, all right, and B is also an integer. But the condition here is that B should not be equal to 0. If B is equal to 0, then this ceases to be a rational number. All right. So a rational number or rational numbers are numbers that can be expressed in the form A over B, where the denominator, which is B, should not be equal to 0. Should not be equal to 0. Right? Should not be equal to 0. But the numerator can be equal to 0. But the denominator should not be equal to 0. So all the numbers, I mean even numbers, prime numbers, whole numbers, odd numbers, integers, all are classified under rational numbers. Is 2 a rational number? Yes. 2 is a rational number because 2 can also be written as 2 over 1. Remember from the definition, it can be represented into A on B, and A is what? An integer. B is also an integer but should not be equal to 0. So 2 is a rational number because we can represent it on the form 2 over 1. Generally, every whole number is the same as itself divided by 1. So 2 is the same as 2 over 1. 3 is the same as 3 over 1. Alright. So because they can be represented in a fraction form or of the form A over B, they are 2 and 3 are classified as rational numbers. What about -1? Is it a rational number? Yes, it is a rational number. And the reason is because -1 over 1. Alright, so it means that -1 can be expressed in the form A over B. Alright, so these are rational numbers. Alright, so what it means is that all integers are rational numbers. Alright, all integers are rational numbers because -1 rational number, 0 rational number, 1 rational number, 2 a rational number. So all integers are rational numbers. All integers are rational numbers, but not all rational numbers are integers. So you can note this down. All integers are rational numbers, but not all rational numbers are integers. And an example is this. We've seen that -1 is an integer, all right? And that is a rational number. But in the case where I have a rational number like 2 on 3, all right? Or let me just use this example, 3 on 2. 3 on 2 is not an integer, but a rational number because 3 on 2 will not give us a whole number. And remember that all integers are whole numbers. Integers should be whole numbers, all right? But 3 on 2 will give us 1.5. 1.5 is not a whole number, so it cannot be classified as an integer. But 1.5 is a rational number, all right? But not an integer. So all integers are rational numbers, but all rational numbers, not all rational numbers are integers. Okay. Now, let me take you to another real number or another classification of the real number system. Another classification is what we call irrational numbers. Now, what are irrational numbers? What are irrational numbers? Irrational numbers are simply square root of prime numbers. All right, so square root of all prime numbers are what you call irrational numbers. Then also, irrational numbers cannot be expressed in the form A over B. They cannot be expressed in the form A over B. All right, so irrational numbers are numbers that cannot be expressed in the form A on B. And irrational numbers are simply square root of prime numbers. All right, so examples of irrational numbers are square root of 2 because 2 is a prime number, square root of 3, square root of 4, square root of 5, square root of 7. All these are irrational numbers. And the reason is because they cannot be expressed in the form A on B. If you go to your calculator and you punch square root of 2, you will not get a fraction like this. Square root of 3 will not give you a fraction. It is difficult to express these in the form A on B. And because of that, they are called irrational numbers. So if you are asked to give examples of irrational numbers, just find square root of any prime number. All right, square root of any prime number is an irrational number. It's an irrational number. So, thank you for watching this video. And please, I want you to look forward to the next lesson, because this is the first video on a series I'm starting on high school general mathematics. So I want you to stay glued to this channel and follow the subsequent lessons. Now, before I end, I want to leave you with this question. Now, I want you to brainstorm and then comment in the comment section with your answer. Comment in the comment section with your answer. Is 0.333 rational or irrational number? Then also, is 0.6666 irrational or rational number? Then is -14 rational or irrational? Then which of the groups will you classify for us? Is it even? Is it odd? Is it prime number? And what about 23? Where do you classify 23? Is it a prime number? Is it an odd number? Now remember, you can get a number which can be a prime number and at the same time an odd number. All right. Okay. Now let me help you with this, with the first one. This is a rational number. Why is it a rational number? It is a rational number because it can be reduced into a fraction, which is 1 on 3. All right, so because this can be represented as 1 on 3, it is a rational number. All right, so do that for the rest.